The air in the Blackwood Preserve was heavy and sharp, carrying the metallic scent of pine sap and the first true frost of late October. Elias Vance, 2 years into his role as a solo wilderness monitor after a decade operating in less predictable environments, checked his perimeter sweep log. It was 1748. The sun had already dipped below the ridges, and the dense canopy was swallowing the last traces of usable light. He was far from the established trails, navigating a maintenance track intended only for utility access, heading back toward the main station. The silence was profound, the kind of absolute quiet that usually signaled undisturbed wilderness. Then, the silence shattered. It was a high, ragged sound, the unmistakable noise of a child in absolute, unadulterated terror, not a cry of pain, but a scream of desperate panic, echoing unnaturally off the thick stands of Douglas fir. Elias killed the engine of the patrol vehicle instantly, the sudden absence of the diesel rumble amplifying the frantic, broken gasps that followed. He did not hesitate. This area of the preserve was known for its remoteness. The nearest residential zone was a 7-mile hike through thick brush, and the only other vehicle access point was hours away. Whatever was happening, immediate intervention was mandatory. Elias pulled the heavy-duty maglite from its mount, the beam cutting a thick, solid column through the rapidly darkening woods. His hand instinctively went to the utility belt, confirming the placement of the radio and the industrial-strength repellent spray. Protocol dictated he radio in the disturbance immediately, but the signal strength here was notoriously weak, often requiring him to move into a clearing to connect. The child's scream sounded close, maybe 50 yards off the track, toward a dense grouping of older trees known locally as the Widow's Thicket, a place where the undergrowth was thick and visibility was zero. He grabbed the heavy wooden-handled machete, not for confrontation, but for clearing the path. It was a necessary tool in this terrain. Moving fast, but without noise, Elias slipped into the woods. He focused entirely on compartmentalizing the urgency, filtering the raw fear in the sound into actionable data: direction, distance, repetition. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a ragged, muffled sobbing sound, low to the ground. This meant the child was either hiding, exhausted, or restrained. He pushed through the tangled blackberry vines and low-hanging branches, ignoring the stinging scratches on his arms. The forest floor here was uneven, covered in slippery pine needles and moss-covered stones. He adjusted his pace, recognizing the sound of small, frantic movements just ahead. He dropped to a crouch, slowing his breathing until it was almost imperceptible, utilizing the cover of a massive, fallen log. He swept the powerful beam of the flashlight in a controlled arc, careful not to cast his own shadow or blind the potential victim. The light caught movement low beneath a sprawling cedar. It was a boy, small, maybe 7 or 8 years old, huddled tightly against the rough bark. He was wearing a light hoodie and jeans, completely unprepared for the plummeting evening temperature. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, eyes wide and fixed on something beyond Elias, further back into the shadows. The boy was shaking violently, his small chest heaving, struggling to draw air. He looked up at Elias, and the raw, silent terror in his eyes was a chilling confirmation that this was not a simple lost hiker scenario. Elias lowered his voice to a steady, calm register, projecting control and safety. "Hey, I'm Elias. I'm a park ranger. You're safe now. What's your name?" The boy didn't respond, only pointing a trembling finger, not at Elias, but past him, into the heavy dark where the trees clustered impossibly close. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a strained whisper, barely audible above the rustle of the wind through the pines. "He's there. The beast. He's waiting for me." Elias knew instantly the beast was not a bear or a cougar. The boy's fear was human-centric, directed at a knowing, deliberate threat. Elias kept his body angled to shield the boy, while simultaneously scanning the periphery. He activated the radio on a low volume, speaking rapidly into the mic. "Station, this is Ranger Vance, unauthorized presence, potential child endangerment, Blackwood Thicket, Sector 7, need immediate backup and perimeter sweep, non-violent extraction in progress." He did not wait for confirmation, knowing the transmission was likely weak and delayed. He took a step toward the boy, holding the flashlight steady, focusing on the area the boy indicated. It was a transition zone, where the ground dropped sharply into a thicket of old gnarled scrub oak. The shadows were absolute, but Elias's trained eye knew how to differentiate between natural darkness and the disruption of a solid mass. And there it was, not moving, not making a sound, just standing, tall, too tall for a natural feature, too rigid for a shadow cast by the wind. It was the outline of a person, impossibly still, positioned just at the edge of the deepest shadow, effectively camouflaged against the trunk of a massive pine. The figure was observing them. Elias felt a cold, professional dread settle in his stomach. This was calculated. This was predatory. The figure was simply waiting to see what Elias would do, observing the extraction process as if sizing up the new variable in its equation. The beast was patient, and its stillness was more threatening than any sudden movement. Elias crouched fully, keeping his attention split between the boy and the silent watcher 50 feet away. He gently grasped the boy's arm, his grip firm but reassuring. "We need to move, quickly and quietly. Can you walk?" The boy, finally sensing a protector, nodded frantically, clutching Elias's heavy jacket. "Don't look back, son. Just follow my boots." Elias shifted his grip on the machete, holding it defensively low. He pulled the boy tightly to his side, using his own body as a shield, and began moving sideways, backing away from the thicket and toward the slightly more open maintenance track where the patrol vehicle waited. Every step was deliberate, silent, testing the ground before bearing weight. The critical mistake would be to panic or break the silent retreat. He focused his peripheral vision intensely on the shadow line, watching for any shift in the posture of the stationary figure. The figure did not move. It remained a sentinel of menace, a silent, dark silhouette, confirming the reality of the threat. As they cleared the immediate tangle of roots and reached the slightly clearer ground, Elias risked a quick glance back over his shoulder, confirming the ranger vehicle was visible, maybe 25 yards away. That was when the beast finally moved. It was a slow, deliberate step, shifting its weight out of the absolute shadow and into the slightly paler darkness of the twilight. The figure was large, heavily built, and seemed to possess an unnatural grace for its size, covering ground silently. It was now following them, maintaining the distance, ensuring Elias understood that the pursuit had not ended. The objective had simply shifted from the boy to both of them. Elias felt the boy flinch hard against his side, having caught the movement in his own peripheral view. The silent stalker had transitioned from observer to active pursuer, closing the distance slowly, methodically, ensuring maximum psychological pressure. They were exposed, making a slow retreat across open ground toward a vehicle that felt miles away, and the threat behind them was a shadow that refused to be shaken. Elias tightened his grip on the boy, knowing that the next 15 seconds would determine whether they reached the relative safety of the locked truck or whether the beast decided to accelerate its pace and force a confrontation right there in the fading light. He pushed the boy forward, urging him faster, the sound of the pursuer's careful, heavy footfalls now almost audible over the rapid pounding of Elias's own heartbeat. The tension coiled tight in the air, a physical weight pressing down on them both. The truck was right there, the dark metal glinting faintly, but the distance felt infinite, and the silent threat behind them was closing fast. The truck was right there, the dark metal glinting faintly, but the distance felt infinite, and the silent threat behind them was closing fast. Elias pushed the boy forward, urging him faster, the sound of the pursuer's careful, heavy footfalls now almost audible over the rapid pounding of Elias's own heartbeat. They reached the driver's side door simultaneously. Elias fumbled for the keychain, the cold steel slippery with sweat against his palm. His peripheral vision registered the shift. The pursuer had abandoned the slow, deliberate pace. The shadow was now a massive, accelerating bulk, closing the final few meters with terrifying speed. Its intent no longer passive observation, but immediate capture. There was no time for finesse. Elias jammed the key into the lock cylinder, turning it with a violent, urgent twist that almost snapped the metal shank. The locking mechanism groaned, a loud mechanical clunk that sounded deafening in the stillness of the abandoned lot. He threw the door open, shoving the boy across the threshold and onto the passenger seat with a sharp, necessary force. The boy, startled but compliant, scrambled clumsily inside, his small body hitting the worn fabric of the seat. Elias was halfway into the cab when the impact struck. It wasn't a punch or a blow, but a sheer massive weight hitting the heavy metal edge of the door. The sound was a dull, sickening thud, followed by the screech of steel grinding against steel as the door was violently checked mid-swing. The pursuer had intercepted the movement. catching the door and preventing Elias from fully entering and securing the immediate barrier. Elias's reflexes took over, honed by years of anticipation. He didn't try to fight the strength holding the door. He used the momentary resistance to pivot. He slammed his left shoulder against the interior of the door frame, using the momentum to spin his body entirely inside the truck, while simultaneously reaching across the cab to grab the interior handle. His goal was simple: containment. The pursuer, a massive form clad in dark, heavy clothing that seemed to absorb the twilight, lunged forward, a heavy hand reaching into the cab, aiming for Elias's leg or torso. This was the beast, materialized, imposing, and undeniably focused. Elias pulled the handle with all his strength, simultaneously kicking out with his heavy boot. The kick didn't connect solidly with the figure, but it struck the figure's forearm, interrupting the reach and buying a crucial half-second. The heavy door slammed shut with a reverberating bang that sealed them momentarily inside the insulated silence of the truck cab. The world outside instantly became muffled, the violence reduced to a dull external pressure. Elias did not hesitate. His hand found the power lock switch, and the audible click-clack of the solenoids confirmed that all doors were secured. He immediately twisted the ignition key. The diesel engine, cold and reluctant, coughed once, stalled, and then roared to life with a satisfying, powerful vibration that shook the chassis. He threw the stick shift into reverse, all while maintaining a relentless visual scan through the rearview mirror and the side windows. The figure was still there, a silhouette pressed against the glass of the driver's side window, its presence dominating the small field of view. There was no anger visible, only cold, unyielding determination etched onto a face obscured partially by shadow and the low angle of the setting sun. Elias felt the unnerving weight of that gaze, a gaze devoid of emotion, but heavy with predatory focus. He jammed the accelerator pedal down. The heavy truck lurched backward, spinning the rear tires slightly on the loose gravel before finding purchase. The sudden, violent movement was designed to create immediate critical distance. As the truck moved, the figure recoiled, stepping back not in panic but in calculated adjustment, confirming Elias's assessment. This was not a desperate amateur, but someone trained and committed. The figure watched them retreat, not pursuing immediately, but simply observing the vehicle's motion, absorbing the tactical defeat of the moment, conserving energy. Elias wrenched the wheel hard, swinging the truck into a tight three-point turn, ignoring the small objects crushed under the heavy tires. He shifted into drive, flooring the throttle. The engine screamed a deep, satisfying roar of acceleration, pulling them swiftly out of the abandoned lot and onto the access road. He glanced at the boy beside him, who was huddled, small and pale, gripping the seatbelt with white knuckles, but blessedly silent and unharmed. "We're clear," Elias stated, his voice tight, focusing on the road ahead, pushing the speed limit instantly. He watched the rearview mirror until the industrial lot was nothing but a smear of dark shapes against the horizon. The beast had not followed. This was a calculated move, not a surrender. The pursuer knew the truck's plate number, the general direction, and likely had other resources or surveillance in place. Retreat was merely a change of phase in the overall strategy. Elias navigated the truck through the maze of side streets, focusing intently on varying his speed and direction, implementing the defensive driving protocols he knew by heart. He needed to make sure they were not being tracked electronically or visually. He drove for 20 minutes through increasingly residential areas before he allowed himself to slow the pace and analyze the situation fully. They were physically safe for the moment, encased in the heavy steel shell of the vehicle, but the psychological boundary had been violently breached. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, immediate, and highly capable. He pulled the truck into the relative anonymity of a large, brightly lit gas station, parking at the far end of the lot away from the main traffic. He cut the engine, letting the silence settle heavily around them, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the cooling manifold. He turned to the boy, whose name was Leo, his expression softening slightly but remaining strictly professional. "Leo," Elias began, his voice low and steady, "you did exactly what you were told. You stayed quiet, you moved fast. We are safe now, you understand?" Leo nodded slowly, his eyes wide and dark. He was big. "He was," Elias confirmed. "But he didn't get you. He didn't get us." He paused, ensuring the boy absorbed the sense of immediate victory, however small. "Now we need to move quickly but calmly. I need you to stay in the truck. I'm going inside to get us something to drink and to make a critical call. Do not open this door for anyone. Not even if they say they are police. Only me. Understood? Leo swallowed hard and nodded again, gripping his seatbelt tighter. Understood, Elias. Elias stepped out of the truck, the cold evening air a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the cab. He locked the door immediately, testing the handle. He walked swiftly towards the brightly lit store entrance, his senses still on high alert, scanning the parking lot and the surrounding shadows for any sign of secondary surveillance or a follow-up action. Inside the store, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he grabbed a couple of bottles of water, his mind already formulating the next steps. This engagement had confirmed several things. First, the threat was operating alone at the point of contact, but its methods suggested organized support. Second, the objective was clearly the boy Leo. Third, the pursuer possessed significant physical strength and training, evidenced by the way he handled the heavy truck door. Elias understood now that passive defense was insufficient. He had transitioned from protecting a vulnerable charge to actively engaging a dangerous adversary. The encounter in the lot was a skirmish, and while they had escaped, the war was far from over. He paid for the water, his demeanor calm and unremarkable, ensuring he did not draw any unnecessary attention from the attendant or the few other customers. As he walked back toward the truck, he pulled his cell phone from an internal pocket. He needed to inform his limited network, his only trusted resource, about the immediate escalation. This wasn't a job for the police. The police were compromised, or at the very least, too slow and bureaucratic to handle the speed and precision of this threat. This required immediate surgical intervention. He dialed a secure, encrypted line, a number used only for emergencies of this precise nature. It rang twice before a crisp female voice answered, devoid of identifying features. "Status," the voice commanded. "Contact confirmed," Elias stated, his voice low and precise, feeding the required information into the secure channel. "Level 2 escalation. Physical pursuit initiated. Subject is safe and secured momentarily. We were engaged by a single operative, male, large build, high level of training, zero hesitation. We are now mobile and evasive. Need immediate extraction point confirmation and logistical support for a hard stop. I cannot risk continuous transit. They will locate us via digital tracking or surveillance grid." There was a brief, almost imperceptible delay on the other end. "Coordinates incoming. Destination is designated Safe Haven Delta 9. ETA 4 hours maximum. Maintain unpredictable vector until arrival. Do not engage. Your primary mission is extraction and protection. Repeat, do not engage the primary threat unless absolutely necessary for preservation of life." Elias accepted the coordinates, a complex string of numbers that immediately began calculating the fastest, most covert route on his separate, secure GPS unit. "Understood. Primary threat identity pending analysis. I will move now." He ended the call, the confirmation of support providing a necessary anchor in the chaos. He returned to the truck, unlocked the door, and slid back into the driver's seat. Leo looked up, relief flooding his expression. Elias handed him the water bottle. "Drink this, Leo. We're going on a long drive now. We're heading to a place where no one will find us. We are taking the fight to them, but we do it on our terms, not theirs." He started the engine again, pulling smoothly out of the gas station. His eyes, however, were no longer focused solely on evasion. They were focused on the future. The attempt on Leo's life had been personal, aggressive, and direct. The beast had shown its hand. Elias knew that retreating indefinitely was unsustainable. He had secured the package, but now he had to neutralize the source of the danger. The role of protector had just expanded into the role of hunter. As the truck merged onto the dark, empty highway, heading away from the city lights and toward the distant, hidden haven, Elias felt a cold resolve settle over him. He was committed. The beast had made a fundamental mistake. It had threatened the vulnerable under Elias's watch, and now Elias would ensure that threat was permanently removed from the equation. The night was long, and the drive was only the beginning of the tactical retaliation he was already meticulously planning. He kept the speed steady, maintaining absolute focus on the secure GPS screen, knowing that the next 4 hours were a race not just against time, but against an unseen network of resources dedicated to reclaiming the boy. The tension in the cab was palpable, a silent promise of the confrontation that lay ahead. The night drive was a study in controlled paranoia. For 4 hours, Elias maintained a speed that was fast enough to put distance between them and the city, yet slow enough to avoid drawing the attention of highway patrols or automated surveillance systems that the organization, known internally as the Beast, might have access to. The boy, silent and deeply withdrawn, slept fitfully in the secure compartment, shielded from view and electronically cloaked. Elias utilized the time not just for driving, but for executing the final critical updates to his operational plan. He cross-referenced the vague data he had extracted during the initial rescue with current satellite imagery and traffic flow models, mapping out potential choke points and alternative routes for the return trip. He knew that their initial response would be chaotic, focused on recovery. But within hours, the full weight of their infrastructure would pivot toward revenge and elimination. The destination was a small, isolated complex deep in the foothills, a structure specifically designed to be invisible to electronic and physical scrutiny, a true safe haven, maintained by a small, trusted network whose existence was known only to him. As the truck slowed, maneuvering expertly through a dense thicket of old-growth pines and finally stopping inside a reinforced subterranean garage, Elias allowed himself a single, brief exhale. Protocol dictated absolute silence. He activated the internal atmosphere filtration and initiated the complex sequence of biometric and encrypted key checks that unlocked the secure compartment. The boy blinked against the faint filtered light, his eyes wide but now holding a flicker of recognition rather than pure terror. Elias kept his voice low, a steady rumble of assurance, explaining the next steps with concise clarity. A trusted operative, known only as Echo for her unparalleled ability to remain unseen and unheard, was already waiting. Echo was a specialist in psychological care and electronic warfare defense, the perfect guardian for the package. The transfer was swift and professional. Echo confirmed the boy's physical state and immediately guided him toward the deeper living quarters, initiating the necessary isolation and decompression protocols. Elias watched them disappear down the reinforced corridor, the heavy steel door cycling shut behind them with a definitive mechanical click. The package was secured. The primary objective was complete. The clock was now ticking purely on retaliation. Elias shed the heavy civilian outer layers he had worn for the extraction, revealing the operational suit beneath, a composite material designed for maximum mobility, minimal thermal signature, and integrated with kinetic absorption panels. He moved with the focused economy of motion that defined his operational tempo. His gear was laid out on a specialized workbench, the silenced subsonic carbine, calibrated for non-lethal kinetic rounds that delivered maximum stopping power without penetration, the array of customized electronic countermeasures, ECM, that could scramble local communications grids, and the small, highly advanced reconnaissance drone, equipped with millimeter-wave radar and thermal optics, his focus sharpened to a razor's edge. The Beast's central operational node, as determined by the fragmented data from the initial rescue, was located in the derelict Bayside Industrial Zone, a massive abandoned shipyard complex now used as a clandestine data and logistics hub. This location was far enough from the city center to avoid casual observation, yet close enough to major transport arteries for rapid movement of resources. Elias knew the structure would be heavily fortified, manned not by low-level thugs, but by highly trained security contractors who valued discretion and efficiency. Elias climbed back into the truck, but this time the vehicle was transformed. It was now operating in full stealth mode, its engine running on near-silent electric propulsion, its exterior coated with radar-dampening paint, blending into the background radiation of the night. He bypassed the main roads, taking a series of overgrown service trails and neglected access roads that only a comprehensive knowledge of the region's forgotten infrastructure could provide. The journey back was a tactical approach, not merely a commute. He monitored every frequency, every thermal spike on the horizon, treating the entire landscape as a hostile environment. He wasn't just looking for pursuit, he was looking for the subtle signs of preparation, the increased traffic on secure channels, the unusual placement of static surveillance cameras, the scent of a trap being laid. He arrived at the perimeter of the Bayside Zone, just as the first faint hint of pre-dawn grey began to touch the eastern sky, lending a deceptive, eerie quiet to the massive concrete structures. The target was Warehouse 7, the largest and most central structure, identifiable by the faint but persistent hum of high-powered cooling systems, a clear indicator of server racks and electronic infrastructure. Elias parked the vehicle nearly a mile away, deep within the shadow of a collapsed grain silo, obscuring its signature completely. He utilized the reconnaissance drone first, sending the tiny, silent craft high above the complex, maintaining a strict altitude to avoid detection by localized jamming units he suspected were already active. The thermal imagery confirmed his assessment: 3 distinct clusters of heat signatures, moving in established patrol patterns on the ground level, and a significant concentration of personnel within Warehouse 7, specifically around a central reinforced area that was likely the operations room. The security detail was tight, disciplined, and moving with practiced precision. A professional outfit, confirming that this operation was high stakes for the beast. Elias approached the perimeter fence line, not through it but under it. He utilized a specialized high-density polymer mat that distributed his weight, allowing him to navigate the muddy, uneven ground without leaving discernible tracks. He deactivated the pressure sensors along a 20-foot stretch of the fence using a low-power localized frequency injector, creating a temporary, non-alarming blind spot in the security grid. Slipping beneath the wire, he was now inside the operational perimeter. The air was thick with the smell of brine, rust, and stale diesel fuel, the sensory input grounding him in the reality of the infiltration. His movements were fluid and minimal, relying on the deep shadows cast by the massive container stacks. His initial target was the exterior power distribution node for Warehouse 7. Disrupting the main power was too obvious and would trigger immediate lockdown protocols. Instead, Elias needed surgical precision. He located the auxiliary communication relay box nestled behind a bank of generators. Using a specialized cutting tool designed to operate silently and without producing sparks, he severed 3 specific fiber optic bundles that controlled the exterior CCTV loop and the door access log for the main entrance. The systems, now operating without external input, defaulted to a state of normal operation, presenting the illusion of continuous monitoring, while Elias had, in reality, created a 15-minute window of complete electronic invisibility for the main access point. Reaching the reinforced loading dock door of Warehouse 7, Elias employed a sophisticated magnetic bypass tool. The lock mechanism was complex, requiring a series of rapid, alternating magnetic pulses to align the internal tumblers without sounding the highly sensitive internal alarm. It took 90 seconds of meticulous concentration, his body pressed flat against the cold metal, listening for the faint internal clicks. With a soft pneumatic hiss, the door unlocked. He eased it open just enough to slip inside, the darkness inside the warehouse overwhelming the ambient light of the pre-dawn sky. The interior was cavernous, echoing faintly with the continuous hum of ventilation and the distant rhythmic clank of machinery elsewhere in the zone. Stacks of unmarked crates towered toward the ceiling, creating a maze of shadows and obstacles. Elias moved along the edges, sticking to the deep cover, his eyes adjusting quickly to the low light conditions. He identified the internal security patrols immediately, 2 men highly visible in the open lanes, carrying tactical shotguns and communicating through headset mics. Their patrol route was predictable, rigid, and exploitable. Elias waited in the shadow of a stack labeled Industrial Refractory Materials. As the first guard passed, his back momentarily turned toward the blind side of a support column. Elias moved. It was a burst of controlled, athletic energy. He closed the distance in 3 silent strides, his hand snapping out to apply precise pressure to the carotid artery, cutting off blood flow to the brain instantly. The guard collapsed without a sound, Elias catching the weight and easing him gently to the concrete floor. He secured the guard's weapon and communications gear, injecting a localized muscle relaxant to ensure the man remained incapacitated and silent until the operation was complete. He repeated the process with the second guard exactly 90 seconds later, ensuring the patrol timing remained apparently undisturbed on the security monitors elsewhere. The path to the operational center was now clear, leading to a mezzanine level constructed inside the warehouse. This elevated structure was enclosed in thick tinted glass, revealing the faint glow of computer screens within. This was the nerve center. Using an extendable tactical ladder, Elias ascended to the mezzanine level, remaining below the line of sight of the windows. He pressed the thermal imager against the glass, confirming the presence of 4 individuals inside, 3 analysts working at workstations, and a central figure, a large imposing man with close-cropped hair, likely the local commander, standing over a large holographic display of the city grid. Elias knew confrontation here was necessary, but it had to be instantaneous and overwhelming. He positioned a small, specialized breach charge at the seam of the reinforced access door leading into the command center. This charge was designed not for explosion, but for concussive force and acoustic disruption, a non-lethal shockwave meant to disorient and incapacitate without lasting damage. He set the timer for 3 seconds. As he retreated slightly, bracing himself against the supporting steel beam, the charge detonated with a sharp, localized thwump, focused inward. The glass walls rattled violently, and a flash of blinding, contained light filled the mezzanine. Elias surged forward immediately, kicking the now compromised door open. The interior was momentarily silent. The analysts slumped over their desks, stunned and disoriented by the shockwave. The commander, tougher and quicker, was struggling to regain his footing, reaching instinctively for the sidearm holstered at his hip. Elias did not hesitate. He fired 2 kinetic rounds in rapid succession. The first struck the commander squarely in the chest plate of his tactical vest. The force was immense, knocking the large man backward against the main server rack with a grunt of pain, effectively neutralizing his immediate threat. The second round struck the hand attempting to draw the weapon, causing a massive, painful spasm and forcing the weapon to drop uselessly. The room was secure. Elias moved swiftly to the main control panel. He ignored the dazed analysts, their immediate survival predicated on their compliance. He needed the data, the names, the chain of command, and most importantly, the digital fingerprints of the beast itself. He plugged a specialized data siphon into the main server terminal, initiating the extraction sequence. The small screen on his device flashed green. Data transfer initiated. Time estimated 120 seconds. The countdown began, and the rising tension was no longer about physical confrontation, but about the agonizing slowness of digital extraction, while the rest of the organization realized their command center had gone silent. He stood guard over the incapacitated commander, his weapon trained, waiting for the information that would justify the immense risk and finally dismantle the threat to the vulnerable population he had sworn to protect. The silence in the control room was broken only by the high-pitched whine of the cooling fans and the rapid electronic click of data flooding into his encrypted drive. The electronic click intensified, a rapid-fire acknowledgement of thousands of encrypted files migrating from the central server core into Kai's specialized drive. The commander, still fighting the effects of the non-lethal nerve agent, managed only shallow, ragged breaths, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, a silent witness to the complete compromise of his operation. Kai maintained his posture, weapon steady, utilizing the remaining seconds not for relaxation, but for environmental assessment. The tactical display integrated into his visor highlighted the structural integrity of the room and the most immediate points of ingress. The internal network monitor, usually a beacon of constant chatter, had devolved into a fragmented static, indicating that the centralized command had indeed gone dark, severing the immediate link between this nexus and the field operatives. This silence was the most critical factor. It meant the response time of external forces would be delayed, relying on manual check-ins or pre-programmed security sweeps rather than immediate automated alerts. 60 seconds remained. The internal fans of the server racks hummed louder, the strain of the massive data dump palpable. Kai shifted his weight, ensuring his movement created no unnecessary sound. He observed the commander's left hand twitching slightly, a sign that the paralytic effects were beginning their slow, inevitable decay. The commander was still non-functional for combat, but the time for extraction was rapidly approaching its end. Kai calculated the exact moment the agent would wear off significantly, approximately 4 minutes from now, long enough for Kai to achieve distance, but too short for complacency. 40 seconds. A deep, resonant thump echoed from 2 floors below, instantly registering on the floor sensors Kai had activated upon entry. It was not an alarm. It was the sound of a heavy security door being manually breached or forcefully opened. They were checking the perimeter, realizing the lack of response from the central hub. The clock was now Kai's most dangerous enemy. 20 seconds. The status bar on the siphon device crawled towards 95% completion. Kai mentally mapped the quickest route to the ventilation system access point he had pre-selected. It was a narrow, high-risk path requiring immediate ascent, but it offered the best chance of bypassing the immediate choke points that the incoming response team would inevitably secure. 10 seconds. The noise from below was now accompanied by the distinct muffled cadence of tactical boots moving rapidly through concrete corridors. The response team was well trained and moving fast. 5 seconds. The indicator flashed bright amber, then solid green. Data transfer complete. Integrity verified. Kai instantly disconnected the siphon drive, securing the small, highly encrypted module in a reinforced pouch on his belt. The mission objective was secured. He pivoted not towards the door but towards the far wall where the disabled commander lay. Quick, precise movements were paramount. He pulled a small adhesive device from a utility pouch and slapped it onto the commander's chest plate. This device was a specialized, non-lethal dispersal unit. He activated a secondary timer on his wrist computer, setting it for a 5-minute delay. This timing was crucial. It would grant him his necessary head start, but ensure the commander was not left incapacitated for too long, minimizing any potential legal or ethical fallout associated with unnecessary suffering. He took one last clinical look at the room, confirming that the initial breach points were still locked down by his temporary electromagnetic clamps. The silence broke violently. A high-pitched, insistent electronic whine pierced the air, the emergency system bypassing the local blackout and broadcasting a facility-wide breach alert. Simultaneously, the heavy steel door leading to the main corridor shuddered violently as the response team reached the control level and began their forced entry procedure. The sound of high-powered cutting tools grinding against the reinforced metal was deafening. Kai moved with practiced efficiency. He reached the ventilation access panel, utilizing a specialized key card to override the magnetic lock, and pulled the metal grill away. He tossed a small cylindrical canister, a localized smoke and disorienting agent, into the center of the control room. The gas expanded rapidly, dense and immediately obscuring vision, while simultaneously broadcasting a low-frequency pulse designed to disrupt tactical communications. As the smoke billowed, the door finally gave way with a screech of tearing metal. 2 figures, heavily armored and equipped, burst through the opening, weapons raised, only to be immediately enveloped by the blinding cloud. Their entry was met not by resistance, but by immediate disorientation and the sudden silence of their comms. Kai was already scrambling into the ventilation shaft, pulling the access panel back into place and locking it from the inside. The space was tight, narrow, and smelled of dust and stale air, but it was his only immediate escape vector. He activated the magnetic clamps on his gloves and knees, allowing him to scale the vertical shaft with unnatural speed, driven by the knowledge that the tactical unit below would recover from the initial disorientation within seconds. He heard muffled shouts below, then the rhythmic pounding of fists against the access panel he had just secured. They knew he had gone vertical, but the shaft was designed for maintenance, not pursuit, and his gear was optimized for low-profile movement. He ascended 3 full levels, moving horizontally only when necessary to navigate around large structural supports. The sound of the facility's emergency sirens faded slightly as he moved deeper into the building's infrastructure, trading the immediate danger of confrontation for the constant, quiet threat of discovery within the walls. He finally reached a junction point high above the main administrative block, a pre-planned secondary extraction route. He disengaged the magnetic grip and slid down a service ladder into a subterranean maintenance tunnel, a dark, sewage-smelling void that ran beneath the facility's secure perimeter. He moved quickly now, his light source minimal, relying on passive night vision. The noise of the sirens, previously distant, was now entirely muted by the thick concrete and earth above. He was clear of the immediate threat radius. The adrenaline that had fueled the initial confrontation began to recede, replaced by the heavy weight of success and the cold realization of the immense task ahead. The maintenance tunnel opened into a secluded, abandoned utility warehouse miles away from the main facility. This was the first safe harbor. Kai shed his heavy tactical vest and helmet, allowing the cool night air to hit his face. He checked the encrypted drive, confirming its temperature and integrity. The data was safe. He performed a rapid, full-spectrum sweep of the warehouse perimeter, confirming that no external tracking devices had followed him. and that the location remained secure. This marked the beginning of the post-operational phase, the cold, analytical work that was arguably more dangerous than the initial infiltration. The acquisition of the data meant that the Beast, the organization he was targeting, was no longer an abstract network of criminals, but a concrete entity defined by names, financial records, operational schedules, and digital communication logs. The sheer volume of the data suggested a deep, systematic corruption, reaching far beyond the local sector he had initially targeted. He set up his portable decryption and analysis rig, a high-powered, hardened laptop designed for secure data processing. The first task was to crack the top-level encryption key used by the commander. It took only minutes. His custom algorithms were designed specifically to exploit known backdoors in the system architecture employed by such organizations. As the main directory structure unfolded on his screen, the scope of the operation became terrifyingly clear. This was not a localized criminal enterprise. It was an inter-regional trafficking operation, disguised under layers of legitimate corporate entities and political protection. The names listed under the patron files were startling, confirming his deepest fears about the extent of the infiltration into civil governance. He began isolating the most critical information, the list of current victims, their locations, and the immediate schedule for their transfer. This was the priority. The data confirmed 3 immediate transfers scheduled for the next 48 hours, involving vulnerable individuals who needed immediate, discreet intervention. The risk of alerting the entire organization by rescuing them prematurely was immense, but inaction was not an option. He had the names, the routes, and the timing. The successful infiltration had bought him a critical window of opportunity, perhaps 36 hours, before the Beast fully reorganized and secured its digital infrastructure. They would assume the theft was financially motivated, or perhaps an external intelligence operation. They would secure the assets and purge the digital records, but they wouldn't expect a systematic, surgical dismantling based on the internal data they thought was protected. Kai knew he had to strike multiple targets simultaneously, neutralizing the command structure and extracting the vulnerable before the organization could regroup. The data was the blueprint for justice, but the execution required perfect timing and zero tolerance for error. The fight was no longer about breaking into a building, it was about tearing down an institution, name by name, location by location. He initiated the cross-referencing sequence, loading the financial ledgers against the communication logs, searching for the weakest links in the chain, the individuals who could be neutralized without raising the full alarm. The flickering light of the screen reflected in his focused eyes, the weight of dozens of innocent lives resting on his ability to interpret the cold language of corrupted data. The true work had begun. The true work had begun. Kai moved across his command center with a sudden, intense energy, the cold analysis of the data now translating into precise, kinetic action. The cross-referencing sequence had isolated 3 critical nodes that needed simultaneous neutralization. The high-level financial officer responsible for asset laundering and distribution, designated Target Alpha, the primary security and logistics coordinator, Target Beta, and the remote holding facility housing the most vulnerable, Target Gamma. Synchronization was mandatory. If one target failed to fall precisely when the others did, the entire network would scatter and rebuild instantly. Kai initiated the secure, encrypted channels to his specialized logistical assets, individuals who operated entirely outside his direct observation, serving only as conduits for safe passage and immediate extraction. He transmitted compressed data packets containing detailed schematics, timing sequences, and secure routing information. Their mission was strictly logistical: receive and transport the vulnerable from Target Gamma, and establish the digital infrastructure necessary to freeze all financial movement initiated by Target Alpha. Kai's role was the direct confrontation and systemic collapse. He dressed quickly, the movement practiced and silent, shedding the digital strategist persona for the operative. He carried specialized non-lethal tools designed for bypassing modern security measures and disrupting localized communication grids, prioritizing efficiency and speed over any form of direct engagement. Target Alpha, a man named Sterling, was currently overseeing a major transfer from a secure satellite office in the financial district. This office was the organization's heart valve, pumping illicit funds through shell corporations. Kai approached the building 15 minutes ahead of the synchronized strike time, utilizing a subterranean service access point identified through Sterling's own maintenance logs. The internal climate control system was the key weakness. Kai injected a localized code package that slowly, imperceptibly began to corrupt the building's network redundancy protocols. By the time he reached the executive floor, the office was operating on auxiliary power, lights flickering, communications intermittently failing, just enough confusion to mask his presence. Sterling was alone, agitated, furiously attempting to salvage a failing transfer on multiple screens. Kai materialized from the shadow of the server room access panel. Sterling startled, eyes wide, recognizing the impossibility of a silent intrusion into his fortress. Kai did not speak, instead projecting the comprehensive encrypted data package onto Sterling's main monitor, a full ledger detailing 2 years of illegal transactions, cross-referenced with personal communications and asset ownership tracing directly back to him. The weight of the evidence was immediate and crushing. Sterling, a man accustomed to untouchable financial power, saw his entire existence summarized on a screen, ready for public dissemination and immediate federal action. Kai extended a single hardened data drive. The message was implicit. Transfer all remaining liquid assets to the pre-designated holding account, funds intended for the vulnerable, and provide the access codes for the primary operational servers housed in target beta's location, or the data goes live, along with the immediate freezing of every personal account linked to the illicit activity. The confrontation lasted under 90 seconds. Sterling, broken by the sudden inescapable reality of total ruin and decades in a federal facility, complied, his fingers shaking as he executed the transfer and provided the necessary system keys. The financial nerve center was neutralized, not through violence, but through absolute digital leverage. With Alpha secured, the clock was ticking down to the extraction at Target Gamma, the remote holding facility disguised as a defunct industrial warehouse miles outside the city limits. This location relied heavily on physical security and isolation. Kai's logistical team was already positioned, waiting for the all-clear signal. Using the access codes provided by Sterling, Kai remotely initiated a localized, non-destructive electromagnetic pulse aimed only at the facility's external cellular repeaters and primary camera feed buffers, creating a temporary 5-minute blind spot and communication blackout. He entered swiftly through a rarely used loading dock. The internal layout was simple, designed for containment rather than comfort. The air was heavy and cold. He moved through the concrete corridors, bypassing 2 patrolling guards who were distracted by the sudden, inexplicable failure of their handheld communication devices. He located the central control room, quickly neutralizing the communication relays and locking the doors internally before the alarms could be raised. The vulnerable individuals were housed in small, sterile rooms. Kai worked systematically, overriding the electronic locks and speaking only in low, steady tones, emphasizing that they were safe and that immediate, silent compliance was essential. The fear in their eyes was palpable, a chilling reminder of the stakes. He guided them one by one through the rear service exit, handing them off to the waiting logistical transport team, vehicles that vanished into the night, their movements untraceable, their destination secure. The extraction was flawless, executed in 3 minutes and 45 seconds, leaving the guards inside unaware until the communication systems rebooted moments later, revealing empty rooms and locked doors. The final phase was Target Beta, the Chief of Security Operational Commander and the organization's central nervous system, housed in a heavily fortified private residence. This individual, known only as Thorn, was ruthless and meticulous. Kai arrived as the news of the financial freezing and the silent extraction filtered through the organization's fractured channels. Thorn was not panicking. He was mobilizing, attempting to isolate the source of the attack. Kai did not need to physically confront Thorn. He utilized the system access keys obtained from Sterling to dive deep into Thorn's operational network, a network Thorn believed was impenetrable. Kai didn't just delete data. He inserted irrefutable evidence of Thorn's own internal corruption, cross-referencing his private communications with attempts to siphon assets from the organization itself, a betrayal of trust within the criminal hierarchy. Simultaneously, Kai activated a dormant, previously undetectable program within Thorne's residence automation system, locking down all external physical exits and jamming all radio and data transmissions within a 50-meter radius. Thorne found himself abruptly isolated, his screens flashing with error codes, his communication lines dead, and his secure house transformed into an electronic cage. The final blow came when Kai projected a single, looping message across every compromised screen in Thorne's command room, the digital ledger of his private betrayals, now uploaded to an unalterable, distributed public database. Thorne was neutralized by internal collapse and technological isolation. His operational control was shattered, and his standing within the shadow hierarchy was irreparably ruined. The coordinated strike was complete. Within the space of 45 minutes, the organization's command structure was paralyzed, its financial assets were frozen and diverted, and its most vulnerable victims were secured and placed into protective anonymity. Kai watched the immediate aftermath from a remote anonymous location several districts away. The subsequent hours were a controlled cascade of institutional failure. Law enforcement, alerted by anonymous, highly detailed reports containing the fully verified and indexed public data packages, descended upon the locations, finding only the shell of an operation, personnel immobilized or trapped, systems compromised, and irrefutable evidence waiting to be collected. Because the collapse was systemic and technological, not violent, the narrative remained focused on corporate malfeasance and organized crime, minimizing the presence of the vigilante element. Kai ensured that the narrative presented to the authorities was clean, undeniable, and focused on the victims and the financial crimes, allowing the justice system to handle the physical mop-up. Epilogue. The first rays of morning light filtered through the industrial windows of Kai's temporary observation post. He systematically purged the workspace, overwriting and encrypting every digital footprint, removing every trace of his presence. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a deep, weary stillness. He reviewed the final confirmation reports. All assets secured, all vulnerable individuals confirmed safe and undergoing necessary transitional support. The mission was a success, measured not by the scale of the fight, but by the quiet efficiency of the dismantling. This justice was cold, calculated, and absolute. Yet as he packed the final piece of hardware, the moral weight of his chosen path remained. He operated in the necessary gray space, acting outside the law to enforce a higher moral imperative, the protection of the defenseless against systems designed to exploit them. He was not a savior. He was a surgical instrument, forced to cut deep to excise the corruption. The world outside would see the headlines of a massive corporate and criminal takedown, praising the tireless work of anonymous investigators, never knowing the precise, synchronized effort that took place in the shadows. Kai knew the silence was temporary. Systems of corruption were organic. They adapted, they regenerated, and new vulnerabilities would inevitably emerge. His work was not a victory lap, but the end of a single chapter. He had ensured justice for these specific victims, but the shadow work demanded perpetual vigilance. He disappeared into the morning crowd, another face in the metropolis, already scanning the horizon for the next tremor, the next sign of injustice that demanded the intervention of the unseen hand. The equipment was stored, the identity was masked, and the watch continued. The only certainty was the necessity of the shadow.